To escape a forced bonding, she grabs the first man she sees, not knowing he's the Alpha King. The palace of Ilarion loomed like a sentinel over the valley, its spires piercing the evening sky. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched across the marble courtyards. Inside, Seraphine stood alone in her chamber, her fingers trembling over the delicate folds of her gown. Tonight she was meant to be bound, not by love but by duty, by magic, by the will of her family. She had been raised to obey, to follow the path carved for her, but her heart had never belonged to the palace, nor to the prophecy that hung over her like a chain. Her eyes, a striking shade of stormy gray, searched the moonlit horizon through the narrow window. The air outside smelled of rain and wild herbs, a freedom she had never known but longed for desperately. The servants had whispered warnings about the ceremony. The palace corridors seemed alive with eyes that watched her every movement. Even the guards, loyal to the throne, carried the weight of unspoken threats in their silence. And yet, a fire burned inside her, a quiet defiance she could no longer ignore. Tonight she would run. Tonight she would choose herself over destiny. She slipped into the shadows, her footsteps light on the cold stone floor. Each step was a heartbeat, a prayer, a defiance of everything she had been told was inevitable. The palace garden spread before her like a labyrinth of silver leaves and dark branches, the wind rustling secrets among the roses and night-blooming lilies. Seraphine inhaled the scent of wet earth, and for the first time, her fear felt like freedom. The world beyond the palace was vast and unknown. Tales told of forests where the shadows moved with a life of their own, where spirits whispered to travelers, guiding or deceiving them. Seraphine didn't care. She would take her chances rather than surrender herself to a life she had never chosen. As she ran, branches clawed at her sleeves and tangled her hair, yet she pressed onward, driven by desperation. Her mind raced with memories of the bonding ceremonies she had heard whispered about, stories of girls who vanished into the night, their fates sealed by forces they could not resist. She shivered at the thought, but the thrill of escaping that destiny surged stronger than her fear. Hours seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. The palace lights grew distant, swallowed by the forest's dense shadows. Seraphine stumbled over roots and rocks, her breath ragged, yet she did not stop. She had no plan, no companion, only a fierce determination to survive, to escape, to live. Then she saw him. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and commanding, his presence immediate and impossible to ignore. His cloak was black as midnight, and his eyes glimmered like embers in the dim light. Seraphine froze, her chest tightening. Instinct, raw and urgent, propelled her forward. She grabbed the first hand she could reach, anyone, pulling herself against the stranger in a desperate, reckless embrace. The man did not flinch. His grip was strong, steady, and terrifyingly confident. He looked down at her, a shadow of curiosity crossing his sharp features. What are you doing?" His voice was low, smooth, carrying an authority that made the wind seem to pause. I did," Seraphine's words faltered. Panic clashed with a strange, sudden thrill. Her pulse raced as her eyes searched his, trying to gauge if he would harm her. Instead, he released her hand, but did not step back. His gaze lingered, intense, calculating. There was danger in him, yes, but also something else. Something that made the forest around them feel smaller, as if the world itself had bent toward this moment. "Run, little wolf," he said, almost amused. "Or don't." Seraphine wanted to speak, to demand answers, to cry out for help, yet the words froze in her throat. Something about him held her still, as if her very heartbeat were tied to his shadow. Who are you?" she whispered finally, the wind tugging at her hair. The man's lips curved faintly. "Names are dangerous things," he replied, "but you may call me Kale. Kale." The name rolled off her tongue like a warning. Somewhere deep in her memory, a story lingered, a tale of the Alpha King, a ruler of a neighboring realm, feared across the lands for his strength and the cruel justice of his rule. Legends spoke of a man who commanded both men and beasts, a man whose enemies vanished without a trace. Seraphine's stomach clenched. She had no idea whom she had grabbed in her blind escape, but the truth settled over her like ice. She had captured the Alpha King himself. Her mind raced. What had she done? What would happen to her now? She had run to freedom, but she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than the palace chains she had fled. Kale studied her, his expression unreadable. The forest around them was still, as if waiting for his decision. He could leave her here, vanish into the shadows, or he could take her somewhere safe, or somewhere far more treacherous. "You are bold," he said finally, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Few would dare touch me without knowing who I am." I didn't know," Seraphine stammered. I needed to run." Kale's gaze softened just slightly, a flicker of something she could not name. Compassion, curiosity. Or something far older, buried beneath the weight of kingship and legend. "Running," he said, "is a start, but running alone often leads to worse danger than the chains one flees." Seraphine's heart sank. She had expected pursuit from her own palace guards, not the enigmatic man who now towered before her. And yet, there was a strange security in his presence, a promise of protection hidden beneath his quiet, formidable aura. "Where will you take me?" she asked, her voice trembling between fear and hope. Kale's lips pressed into a thin line. "That depends on you," he said. "Stay near me and I might keep you alive. Leave my side and the forest will not forgive you. The creatures here, they do not distinguish between thief and princess." Her chest tightened. She had entered the forest seeking freedom, but now she realized freedom came with new chains, chains of choice, of trust, and of danger she had never imagined. Yet for the first time, Seraphine felt the stirrings of courage deeper than fear. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll stay." Kale inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement of her resolve. He led her deeper into the forest, where shadows clung to twisted roots and the moonlight fractured across tangled branches. Every step she took beside him felt both perilous and electrifying, the air thick with unspoken tension. The forest seemed alive around them. Eyes glimmered in the darkness, sounds of creatures unknown whispered in the night. Seraphine's hand brushed against Kale's cloak, almost by accident, and she felt a pulse, something not just of power but of presence, of life and intent, like the forest itself recognized him. "You move like you've survived worse than fear," Kale said quietly. "Tell me, little wolf, what drives you?" I cannot be bound," Seraphine whispered. "Not yet, not like they demand. I will not give them that control." Kale studied her, and she felt as if he were reading her soul, peeling away the lies, the fears, the desperate hope beneath. For a moment, time held its breath, and all the world narrowed to the space between them. "You are reckless," he said finally, "but reckless often survives where the careful perish. Perhaps that is why I allow you to walk beside me." Her chest fluttered at the edge of that rare praise, and yet she could not let herself relax. Every step deeper into the forest was a step into the unknown, into a realm where legends walked, and magic was as real as the chill of night on her skin. Hours passed. The forest thickened. Kale moved with silent grace, eyes scanning the darkness, ears attuned to whispers the wind carried. Seraphine's mind raced with questions, but none dared leave her lips. She had chosen to run, and now she would follow, trusting a man she barely knew with her life. Finally, they reached a small clearing where the moonlight spilled like silver upon the ground. Kale stopped, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Rest," he said. "For now, the forest will not harm you, but soon dawn will bring decisions neither of us can escape." Seraphine lowered herself to the ground, shivering from exhaustion and adrenaline. She looked up at him, this mysterious Alpha King who held both danger and promise in every glance. She wanted to ask his story, his past, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she watched him, and for the first time the forest did not feel entirely frightening. Yet, as sleep tugged at her weary limbs, she knew one truth: freedom had a price, and she had only just begun to pay it. Somewhere in the shadows, Kale's voice whispered once more, low and smooth. Freedom is dangerous, and those who seek it often find more than they bargained for. And Seraphine, with her heart pounding in the silence of the night, realized that she had grabbed fate itself, and it had not yet let go. The first rays of dawn filtered through the thick canopy of the forest, scattering silver light across dew-laden leaves. Seraphine awoke with a start, shivering from the cold and the memory of the night. Her legs ached from running, and her heart still thumped from the encounter with Kale, the Alpha King. She tried to tell herself it had been a mistake, a blunder of desperation, but a part of her could not deny the strange pull that had tied her to him. Kale was already awake, standing at the edge of the clearing. His eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and alert, every movement precise and measured. The Alpha King seemed to carry the forest with him. His presence demanded attention, even in silence. When he noticed her stirring, his gaze softened just slightly, a small acknowledgement that she had survived the night. "Sleep lightly," he said, his voice low and steady. "The forest is not kind and its eyes do not rest." Seraphine swallowed and nodded. She rose slowly, brushing leaves from her gown. I can follow," she said, attempting confidence she did not feel. Kale studied her for a long moment before turning. "You must," he replied simply, and began moving through the forest with the grace of someone who knew every hidden path and shadow. Seraphine followed, careful not to stumble. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the whisper of wind, seemed magnified, and she felt the forest alive around them, watching, waiting. As they walked, Seraphine noticed small details about him she hadn't before. The way his cloak swayed without making a sound, the faint gleam of a sword at his hip, the subtle way he calculated every step, as though anticipating danger before it even existed. She realized he was not just a king of men, he was a king of survival, a predator tempered by intelligence and caution. "You are quiet," Kale remarked without turning, his voice breaking the stillness. "Few survive in the forest with only courage. Curiosity can be a weapon or a curse." "Which are you?" Seraphine faltered, unsure how to answer. I am not sure," she admitted. "I know I wanted to run, but I didn't know where to go." He slowed, glancing at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze as if it could pierce the walls around her heart. "Then you are reckless," he said. "Reckless sometimes survives, as I said last night, but it can also invite death." Her cheeks flushed, partly from fear, partly from something else, an emotion she refused to name. "I do not fear death," she said softly, though she knew it was not entirely true. Kale's eyes softened, just enough for her to see a flicker of something human beneath his commanding presence. "Few say that and mean it," he murmured, and then turned back toward the path ahead, leaving her with a mixture of awe and unease. Hours passed as they traversed the forest. Kale moved like a shadow, silent, alert, leading her through winding paths, over streams, and past ancient trees whose twisted roots seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. The forest was alive with creatures she could not name, their eyes glimmering from the darkness, but Kale's presence seemed to repel danger. Still, Seraphine felt her pulse quicken at every rustle, every snap, every flicker of movement. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, they arrived at a hidden fortress, built into the mountainside, its walls blending seamlessly with the gray stone cliffs. Towers spiraled upward like jagged teeth, and banners marked with the emblem of Kale's house fluttered faintly in the breeze. "This is my refuge," Kale said, gesturing for her to enter cautiously. "Here you may rest, but do not mistake safety for freedom. The world beyond these walls is not forgiving." Inside, the fortress was a labyrinth of stone corridors and high arches, dimly lit by torches. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and something older, something ancient, powerful, and unyielding. Warriors moved silently through the halls, their eyes sharp, their weapons always within reach. When they saw Seraphine, they studied her with suspicion, though none approached. Kale led her to a small chamber, bare but clean, with a bed and a table. "You will stay here," he said. "No one may harm you, but neither may you wander. Do you understand?" Seraphine nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes." He paused, his hand brushing briefly against the doorframe, a gesture of quiet ownership and protection. "Do not mistake my guidance for mercy," he said. "I do not grant it lightly." As the day passed, Seraphine explored the chamber quietly, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man, truly? What power did he hold that made the forest bend around him? And why did she feel, even in her fear, that she was meant to be here beside him? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Kale entered without announcement, his expression unreadable. "You should eat," he said simply, placing a small plate of bread and fruit on the table. Seraphine hesitated. I do not know if I should," she admitted. "You must," he said firmly. "Hunger dulls the mind, and this journey will require both strength and focus." She ate quietly, stealing glances at him as he watched her. There was a tension in the room that made the air thick, an unspoken acknowledgement of the strange bond forming between them. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to bridge the chasm of mystery that separated them, but she feared breaking the fragile balance of trust that had been established. As night fell, Kale returned to the chamber, this time with no guards. He moved with the same silent grace as before, stopping just short of the bed. "Rest now," he said. "The forest does not sleep, and neither can I completely." Seraphine lay down, her thoughts a tangled web of fear, curiosity, and something dangerously close to longing. Kale's presence was constant, a shadow at the edge of her mind, even as sleep began to pull her under. Hours later, a sudden noise shattered the calm. Seraphine awoke to the sound of clashing metal, the low growl of danger. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. Kale was already at the door, sword drawn, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice like steel. "Do not come near." Through the doorway, Seraphine saw shadows moving, assassins, sent by those who wanted her returned to the palace, returned to her fate. She froze, unable to breathe, until Kale's hand brushed against hers, steadying her. "Trust me," he said, and she did. In a blur of movement, he fought with precision and power, every strike controlled, every motion calculated. Seraphine watched in awe, unable to comprehend the sheer force of his skill. He was not just a man, he was a force of nature, a king, a protector, a predator. When the last shadow fell, the chamber was quiet again, save for the shallow breaths of both of them. Seraphine's heart was still racing, and she realized with a start that she had never felt so alive. Kale turned to her, his gaze lingering, searching for something in her expression. "You are safe," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "For now." She nodded, unable to find words, and he stepped back, letting the silence stretch between them. It was a silence heavy with things left unsaid, warnings, truths, desires, fears. She realized that in the night, in the face of danger, something had shifted. Kale's eyes softened, though only just. "You have courage," he said quietly. "Few would survive as you have tonight." Seraphine started, then paused. She wanted to say more, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes locked on his, trying to convey her gratitude, her awe, her fear, and the strange pull she felt toward him. Kale studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Rest. Tomorrow we leave this place. The palace will not forget, and neither will your enemies." As Seraphine lay down again, her thoughts churned with questions, fears, and a strange excitement. She had fled one fate only to find herself in another, a world of shadows, danger, and a man who could both protect and destroy her. She did not yet understand the rules of this world, nor the true extent of Kale's power. But she knew one thing. She was no longer alone, and every step she took beside him would test her courage, her wits, and her heart. Outside, the forest whispered. Inside, two souls, bound by circumstance, fear, and an unspoken attraction, waited for the dawn that would bring new trials, and a path neither had fully chosen. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the fortress, unseen, the palace forces that had sent assassins began to stir, planning, watching, waiting. The journey was only beginning, and the world would not forgive mistakes or weakness. Seraphine's hand brushed against Kale's sword at her side, and she realized that in this place, in this moment, survival was no longer just about running. It was about trust, courage, and the fragile growing bond between them, a bond that could save them or destroy them both. The wind howled through the mountains, carrying with it a chill that seeped into Seraphine's bones. She followed Kale through narrow paths carved into the rock, their steps echoing softly in the still air. Each turn revealed another layer of the fortress, hidden chambers, ancient halls, and corridors where time seemed suspended. Seraphine's heart pounded with a mix of awe and fear. She had survived the forest, the assassins, and Kale's enigmatic presence, yet she sensed that the most dangerous trials were still ahead. Kale moved ahead with purpose, silent as a shadow. His eyes scanned every corner, every stone, as though the walls themselves might hold secrets or threats. Seraphine tried to keep pace, her nerves stretched tight with the weight of unknown dangers and the pull she felt toward him. She could not deny that being near Kale stirred something deep inside her, a strange mixture of fear, admiration, and curiosity. "You have questions," Kale said without turning, his voice cutting through the silence. Seraphine faltered. "I do." "About you, about this place, about me." Kale's shoulders shifted, a subtle acknowledgement. "Everything has a price, little wolf," he said. "Some answers come with danger. Some truths are heavier than you are ready to bear." They reached a large stone door, engraved with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Kale pressed his hand against it, and the runes flared brighter. The door groaned and swung open, revealing a hidden chamber, its walls lined with strange symbols and ancient inscriptions. Candles flickered in sconces, casting dancing shadows across the room. "This is where the past sleeps," Kale said, stepping inside, "where my family's curse waits and where your role begins." Seraphine's eyes widened. "Curse," she whispered. Kale's gaze fell on her, serious and unyielding. "Yes, my family carries a bond that ties life and death to those who enter it. Anyone who is close to me, truly close, risks everything. The curse will test your heart, your courage, even your very life." Fear tightened Seraphine's chest. She had fled one fate only to find herself trapped in another, and yet she could not turn back now, not after all she had endured. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kale's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity remained. "You must face it willingly," he said. "The curse does not yield to force. It listens to choice, to intent, to the bond of hearts, and it tests the bond hardest when trust is fragile." Seraphine swallowed hard, realizing that the journey she had begun in desperation had now become something far more profound. This was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, about proving that her spirit was strong enough to meet his, and strong enough to endure the shadow of the curse. They spent hours in the chamber, Kale teaching her what he could about the symbols, the history, and the magic that lingered like a faint mist over the walls. Seraphine listened, absorbing every word, every warning, every story. She discovered that Kale's power was not merely physical. It was tied to the land, to the forest, and to the very essence of life in his kingdom. His strength was tempered by wisdom, and his ruthlessness was often a shield to protect those he cared for. Yet there was a loneliness in him she could see, a void shaped by responsibility and the weight of his family's legacy. And for the first time, she realized that the man who had seemed untouchable and dangerous was also human, capable of doubt, fear, and longing. As the night deepened, the chamber grew colder. Seraphine noticed shadows moving unnaturally, stretching and twisting like living things. She shivered, drawing her cloak tighter around her. Kale stepped closer, his presence both a shield and a warning. "The curse senses you," he said quietly. "It knows your courage, your fear, and your intentions. It tests all three." Seraphine's pulse quickened. "And what if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kale's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then the bond will break, and it will take everything you hold dear. That is the risk. That is the truth." Fear clawed at her, but beneath it, a spark of determination ignited. She had fled the palace to claim her own life. She would not let the shadow of the curse control her spirit. She would face it, no matter the cost. Kale studied her, and for a moment his mask of authority fell away. He saw the resolve in her eyes, the courage that burned despite the fear. "You are stronger than most," he said softly. "Perhaps that is why fate brought you to me." Their hands brushed as they worked together to decipher the ancient runes. The contact was brief, but it sent a shiver through Seraphine, a reminder of the dangerous intimacy between them, the tension that had grown steadily since their flight from the palace. She could feel the pull between them, an unspoken connection that neither wanted to acknowledge fully but neither could ignore. Hours passed, and the chamber seemed to shift around them. The candles flickered, casting strange patterns on the walls. The air grew thick with magic, heavy with the weight of generations past. Seraphine felt the first prickling of fear, the sensation that the room itself was alive, testing her resolve. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the far wall, unnaturally fast, and Seraphine stepped back, startled. Kale's hand shot out, steadying her, his touch firm and reassuring. "Focus," he said. "Do not let fear take hold. The curse feeds on doubt." Together, they navigated the room, tracing symbols, speaking words that felt strange and powerful on Seraphine's tongue. She felt energy flowing through her, a force she had never known existed. The curse tested her mind and spirit, revealing her deepest fears and insecurities. Each vision felt real, each shadow a threat, yet Kale's presence grounded her, a steady anchor in the storm of magic. At one point, she saw visions of her family, their eyes filled with judgment and disappointment, demanding her submission. She saw the palace guards, the ceremony, the chains she had fled from. Fear and anger surged together, threatening to overwhelm her. Kale's voice broke through the visions. "You are not theirs," he said firmly. "You are yours, claim it." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and faced the visions with determination. One by one, the images faltered, losing their power as she asserted her will. The curse recoiled, testing her still, but she stood firm, her heart steady. When the visions finally faded, Seraphine collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but triumphant. She looked at Kale, who knelt beside her, his expression unreadable but soft at the edges. "You did well," he said quietly. "Many fail at this stage. Many never find the courage to face their own heart." Seraphine's chest heaved, and she felt a strange warmth, a connection that went beyond fear and survival. She realized that the bond between them was no longer accidental. It was growing, forged in trust, courage, and the trials they had faced together. Kale extended his hand to help her up, and she took it, feeling a current of energy pass between them, a subtle, undeniable recognition of the bond forming. For a moment, the world outside the chamber ceased to exist. Only the two of them, the magic and the fragile, growing connection remained. But the moment was broken by a sudden sound, a distant echo, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, cautious and deliberate, coming from the corridor outside. Kale stiffened instantly, his hand tightening on his sword hilt. Seraphine's heart leapt into her throat. "Enemies," Kale said, his voice low and tense. "They have found a way into the fortress." The chamber's candles flickered violently as he moved toward the door, and Seraphine followed, instinctively close, feeling both fear and a strange thrill. The palace forces had not given up. They had tracked her, and now she had drawn danger straight to Kale, and to the fragile bond they were only beginning to understand. Kale's eyes met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of trust and warning. "Stay close," he said. "We face this together." As the door swung open, shadows moved like living predators. Seraphine gripped the edge of her cloak, ready to follow Kale into whatever awaited beyond the chamber. She knew the fight ahead would test her courage, her heart, and the trust she had begun to place in him. And in that moment, standing at the threshold of danger and destiny, she realized one undeniable truth. She was no longer running from fate. She was running toward it, toward Kale, toward the curse, and toward the bond that could either save them both or destroy them. The wind tore through the mountains, carrying with it the scent of stone, rain, and wild herbs. Seraphine and Kale moved quickly along the cliffside path, the forest behind them silent but for the whisper of leaves. They had fled the palace forces, surviving ambushes, illusions, and the shadows that haunted the fortress, yet the true challenge remained. The curse, ancient and unyielding, demanded resolution. Seraphine's heart pounded as she followed Kale. Every step was deliberate, every glance cautious. The bond between them had deepened, not through words but through shared trials. They trusted each other in ways neither had expected. Kale had revealed fragments of his history, the weight of his family's legacy, the pain of isolation, and the curse that tied life and death to those closest to him. Seraphine had shared her fears, her courage, and her determination to live free of destiny's chains. Together they had survived, but the final test awaited. "Are you ready?" Kale asked, his voice low, calm, and commanding. They had reached the entrance of a hidden valley, shielded by cliffs and mist, where the curse's power was strongest. Ancient stones marked the perimeter, engraved with symbols that glowed faintly under the moonlight. Seraphine swallowed, tightening her cloak around her shoulders. "I think I am," she said softly. Fear mingled with a strange excitement. She had faced the unknown before, but this felt like stepping into the heart of destiny itself. Kale's eyes softened for a moment. "Then let us finish this," he said. His hand brushed hers, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them, a bond forged in trust, courage, and shared struggle. The valley was alive with magic. Shadows danced along the cliffs, and the wind seemed to carry whispers of the past, warnings of the future, and promises of power. Kale led her to a stone circle at the heart of the valley, the symbols carved deep into the earth glowing faintly as if recognizing their presence. "This is where the curse can be broken," Kale explained. "But it will not yield easily. The curse tests not just strength but heart. It will ask you both to confront your deepest fears and desires." Seraphine nodded, her pulse racing. She had no illusions about the danger ahead, yet she felt a quiet confidence. Kale had stood by her side through every trial, and she would face this next one with him. He took a deep breath, placing his hands on the carved stones, and began to chant in a low, rhythmic voice. The symbols on the ground pulsed with light, the air thickening as if the valley itself had come alive. Seraphine felt a tremor of energy surge through her, a sensation that was at once frightening and exhilarating. The curse tested them immediately. Shadows rose from the stone circle, taking forms both familiar and strange. Seraphine saw visions of her family, the palace, and the life she had fled. She saw Kale, alone and tormented by the weight of kingship and legacy. Fear, doubt, and longing threatened to overwhelm her, yet Kale's presence grounded her. "You are not alone," Kale said, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "Trust yourself, trust me." Seraphine closed her eyes, drawing strength from his words. She faced each vision, each shadow, each trial with determination, asserting her will, refusing to be controlled by fear. Kale's power intertwined with hers, a shared energy that strengthened them both. Together they pushed back the darkness, their bond acting as a shield and a sword. Hours passed, though it felt like moments. The valley seemed to react to their unity, the symbols glowing brighter, the shadows receding as their courage held firm. Seraphine realized that the curse was not merely a test, it was a mirror, revealing their true selves and the strength of the bond between them. Finally, the shadows fell silent and the valley's energy calmed. The air cleared, the glowing symbols fading to faint lines etched in stone. Seraphine sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kale knelt beside her, his hand finding hers once more, their fingers entwining naturally. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it." Seraphine smiled, her breath ragged. I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. The words were simple, yet they carried everything she felt: gratitude, admiration, and a deep, unspoken connection. Kale's gaze lingered on her, unreadable at first, then softening into something more vulnerable. "And I could not have done it without you," he said quietly. "You showed courage I did not expect and strength that inspires me." For the first time, the barriers between them felt thin, fragile, yet full of possibility. They had faced fear, danger, and the weight of legacy together and emerged stronger, not just in body but in spirit. The bond they shared was no longer accidental or forced. It was chosen, nurtured through trust, challenge, and understanding. Seraphine felt a warmth bloom within her, a quiet joy that mingled with relief. She had run from the palace to escape a life she did not choose, and in the process she had found herself, her courage, and a connection she had never imagined. Kale stood, offering his hand to help her rise. She took it, and together they looked out over the valley, the moonlight casting silver patterns on the stone and mist. The world felt vast and full of possibility, yet the dangers had not entirely vanished. There were still those who sought to control, to manipulate, to undo what they had achieved. "You will need to decide," Kale said, his voice steady. "The palace will not forgive your absence and your enemies will not rest. But here, now, you are free to choose your path." Seraphine nodded, her heart steady. "Then I choose to stay with you," she said, her voice clear and firm. The words were simple, but they carried all the weight of her journey: the courage to escape, the strength to survive, and the desire to embrace the bond they had formed. Kale's expression softened, a rare smile touching his lips. "Then we will face whatever comes next together." The valley seemed to hum with approval, the magic settling into a calm rhythm. Seraphine and Kale stood side by side, their hands clasped, ready to face the future. The bond between them was no longer a chain or a curse. It was a choice, a connection forged in trust, courage, and the trials they had overcome. But even as they breathed in the quiet night, the wind carried a warning. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the palace forces were regrouping. Shadows moved in the distance, plotting, waiting for the right moment. Seraphine's hand tightened on Kale's, a silent acknowledgement that freedom was never without risk. "You are certain?" Kale asked, his voice low, intimate. "Certain you want this path?" Seraphine met his gaze, her eyes steady and unwavering. "I am certain," she said, "with you." He nodded, and together they began the descent from the valley, each step a declaration of courage, trust, and the bond they had chosen. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Seraphine felt the quiet thrill of hope, not just for survival, but for a life shared, a future shaped by their own choices, and a love born from trials, courage, and understanding. As the first light of dawn touched the mountains, Seraphine realized that she had not only escaped the palace, but she had escaped fear itself. She had faced shadows, danger, and doubt, and in doing so she had discovered the power of trust, the strength of the heart, and the depth of connection. Kale's presence at her side was steady, unwavering, and for the first time she saw the man beneath the legend, the king who could be both protector and companion, who could share burdens, fears, and hopes. Together they had conquered the curse, survived the forest and the palace forces, and discovered a bond that would carry them through whatever trials awaited. The valley behind them was quiet now, the air calm, the magic settled. But the mountains held secrets, and the future would test them further. Seraphine's hand remained in Kale's, and in that simple touch, they shared a promise to face the world together, to trust in each other, and to embrace the bond that had transformed fear into courage and survival into something far greater. And as they walked toward the uncertain horizon, Seraphine whispered, "We escaped, but what comes next is ours to shape." Kale's eyes swept over the mountains, the forest, the valley, and the horizon beyond. The wind carried the scent of freedom, danger, and possibility. "Then let us shape it," he said. And together they stepped forward into the dawn, the past behind them, the future ahead, and the bond between them stronger than any curse, any fear, or any shadow that dared to challenge it.